Times, the point is raised by various practitioners that the suttas say, or only really describe, the four basic jhanas as Samma Samadhi. While it is true that the suttas define the four jhanas as right, well, when you pair them with the right view, of course, there are other instances of right concentration in the suttas, and today we have a look at those different types of concentration that can lead you to Nibbana, well, of course, if you pair them with the right view. Otherwise, nothing leads to Nibbana. And by the way, this video assumes that you do not hold the view that jhana is something that happens cushion-based on the meditation, well, in a defined interval, practiced while sitting. If you do hold that view, which is perfectly fine, by the way, then you can just skip this video and everything is alright. I do not mind at all if someone holds it. But first, what is concentration according to the suttas? For this, we can have a look at, for example, Majjhima Nikaya number 117, where it is mentioned that right view comes first and right concentration, or Samma Samadhi, comes last. So this is one of the very elaborate suttas. While the sutta does not mention explicitly that right concentration comes last, it does mention that right view comes first, very explicitly, and it also says that the 7 factors, namely the first 7 elements of the Noble Eightfold Path, are the so-called supports and requisites for noble right concentration. So from that, I think at least, you can infer with high confidence that the Buddha did mean that right concentration is the culmination of the path. And all the stock phrases of jhana start with being thoroughly apart from sensuality. So that is also something that you should keep in mind. First, noble right concentration kinda comes last, and to enter any kind of jhana, you have to be thoroughly secluded, thoroughly apart from sensuality, which is just the craving that is directed at the word of the senses. And then you can enter jhana. And the Buddha never, in the suttas, ever gives any kind of breathing instructions of the modern kind. And only when those preconditions are in place, you can enter jhana. And the Buddha also mentioned, and this is something that many people usually ignore, that there are instances of jhana while walking, while sitting, while lying down, while wearing coarse hemp robes and all those things. But this is usually not something that is mentioned. Anyway, what is this sensuality in detail that people usually just overread when they have a look at the stock phrase? Because the stock phrases, when it comes to jhana, usually happen quite late, and there's usually quite broad and long training that has been undergone before any person really can put those jhana instruction into practice, which is quite important. And you can basically have a look at kind of any sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, and you will always find a very elaborate description of the gradual training that happens for possibly many years on end, and only at the very end of all of that, you have a look at what jhana is. And Majjhima Nikaya number 117 goes as follows. What bhikkhus is noble right concentration with its supports and requisites? That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. Unification of mind equipped with these 7 factors is called noble right concentration with its supports and requisites. Therein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? One understands wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view. This is one's right view. This does not sound very helpful to the vast majority of people, but that's how it is. You do not need many instructions to understand the right view, so to speak, to understand dependent origination, when the rest of the training, the prerequisites, have been put in place. Then you understand wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view. You understand unwholesome as unwholesome and wholesome as wholesome, and all those other things. But first, we have to keep in mind that to enter jhana, you still have to overcome sensuality. This is a gradual training that you undergo, unless you have the luck and the wisdom to learn from any divine messenger event and devalue sensuality that way. You have to do it in a very gradual way. And since the vast majority of us want to train ourselves not to end up in circumstances where we essentially rely on luck, we have to devalue sensuality, little by little, bit by bit, but in a very permanent way. At least as permanent as you can make it. And first, in the West, we have no real concept for non-sensuality. We do not even have a word for it. This is why we call it non-sensuality. And people usually think of sensuality as something that is mainly related to sexuality, as an example. They have no concept for anything related to the senses, because it is all they know. There is nothing else to them. And as such, it is like not being able to talk much about air because it's always there, as an example. And as we do not have a word for it, we have no tradition either. There is no real school of monasticism that pushes renunciation of sensuality as something beneficial. But any kind of sensuality just means the craving that is directed towards the world of the senses, meddling with the sense world. And the sense world is basically all we know, even though there are other kinds of craving that are not sensual in nature. But any kind of interaction based on the senses is usually also sensual for a person who does not have the right view and no training in Samadhi, no training at all. And the Jhana, as the Buddha mentioned, only knows sensuality as an escape from suffering, because at the end of getting what you want, there is a tiny bit of peace that is factually there. This is why sensuality is so enticing. This is why sensuality is a bait and a trap, as the Buddha mentioned, because there is factually something that you gain at the end of it. There is this tiny bit of peace. It's just that it immediately vanishes once you give in to your intentions of greed, aversion, and delusion. And then you have to do it all again. You are shackled by it. You are trapped by it. This is why it's called a trap. And again, not all kinds of craving are sense-based. Jhana just means that you have abandoned all lust for the world of the senses. Jhana means non-lust. That's another translation for it. Sometimes it's also translated as dispassion. And there are other types still. Views of self, other kinds of views. Everything related to views is not really sensual, because you cannot really detect it with your senses and things like that. And other sects, at the time of the Buddha, by the way, did practice jhana. It was just not the right kind of jhana, the Samma Samadhi, that is leading you to Nibbana, because the right view on dependent origination, which is special to the Buddhas, was missing. And many religions in the world have a concept for non-sensuality, and not necessarily the absorption kind of jhana practice or anything like that. They still value virtuous behavior, as an example. They still value good speech. They still value not lying, not cheating, all those things. Many religions in the world have concepts of that, because you can clearly observe that all those kinds of behavior lead to communal disharmony and lead to suffering for those people who engage in those things and behaviors. So it is not far-fetched that there are concepts for those things. And those are even represented in the laws of most nations, because it is just bad for everyone. And any wise person will be able to tell you that. But that is not enough. Something more is necessary. Otherwise, there will be no Samma Samadhi. There will only be Samadhi if you really go to the limits of those kinds of renunciation practice. And jhanas are quasi-permanent, let's call them checkpoints of transforming your entire life away from craving. They are special points, so to speak, in practice, where you have truly renounced first the world of the senses, then also your thinking and pondering processes, and then even more later, until you reach the point of total equanimity, where nothing can move you anymore. This is why the Buddha called the fourth jhana, what was it called? Mindfulness purified by equanimity. So equanimity, that is what you reach at the very end of the training, when nothing can move you. You are truly imperturbable. And when you have a look at the descriptions, for example, in the Majjhima Nikaya, how the Buddha describes the jhanas, or as they are called, the imperturbable, he sometimes compares it with a person who is equal to a war elephant, who is struck by spears, by axes, by swords, by war drums, by foul smells, by any kind of possible sense experience that you can have, the worst and most extreme kinds, and the elephant is not moved by any of that. This is how imperturbable, how equanimous your mind is when you are in jhana. And to enter jhana, you have to give up all types of sensuality on the mental level, which is very important. And as an example, you are free from chocolate, video games, and addictions. Are you free from chocolate, video games, and addictions when you do not have them for a few days? Just if you compare it with the cushion-bound styles of meditation. Surely not. This is not the thoroughly withdrawing from sensuality that the Buddha has been talking about. So there's a different kind of practice necessary to actually move beyond those addictions. Not just replace them with something else, but truly give up the very process of addiction. And jhana is the freedom from basically everything you know. And it requires quite a bit of faith to even go there, because who on earth would give up everything that they deem secure and safe? unless there is someone who explains it to them, and unless they have a very good reason to go there. And it is an extraordinary achievement, I would say. And if you truly attain jhana, it is very close to full liberation, especially when you enter the fourth jhana, the fourth checkpoint on the list, so to speak. If you dwell some time in those states, it's very likely that you at least become an arahant, an anagami, and if you do not make it to full, liberation, to arahantship, then you will at least after 7 years or so be an anagami. So this is if there is still some remainder left. And in essence, if you have all the information that I have given you in mind, now we can talk about different kinds of concentration, because craving has two very gross aspects to it. Craving has the lust side of things, and craving has the aversion or hate type of thing, side of things. And jhana is dedicated towards the lust-based side of craving for the lustful people, which is the majority of people. This is why most instructions, I would say, are dedicated towards people who have a problem with lustful behaviors. Metta meditation, on the other hand, is dedicated towards hate-based people, and it's a hate-based practice, so to speak, an aversion-based practice. And hate just means aversion on a very abstract or general term. Like you can lust for views, you can also be averse towards views. Those are just two sides of the very same thing. And both metta and jhana are a right concentration, so to speak, if they are paired with the right view, and both of them are culminations of the training. So they both come at the very end of the practice, and it is a culmination. You can practice towards jhana, and you can practice towards metta, there's no question about it, and you will have lots of immature states, so to speak, before you reach that goal, but the full jhana, or the full metta, the full noble right concentration, so to speak, only happens at the end of the training, as the Buddha described in Majjhima Nikaya number 117. So at least for now, no more work to do. This is what jhana is. Simply abide in that state. This is also what metta is. You reach the same destination. Craving is just an umbrella term. You can only weaken it as a whole, and you can either weaken it through abandoning lust, and you can also weaken it through abandoning hate, because essentially they are the same thing. You are just looking at the same thing from a slightly different angle. And Brahmavihara, paired with the right view, is also Samma Samadhi, as I understand it. Sensual craving can be overcome by working either with lust or with hate, and it really only depends on your predisposition as a practitioner. Both concentrations are just slightly in angle or meaning, and the practice that culminates in non-valuing of any sensuality is always a samadhi practice, because samadhi essentially means that you overcome the world of the senses. It is just that the training basis differs to a certain degree, and there are other kinds of concentration too. You can base your training in kasina practices and abandon sensuality like that, as an example, where you abandon it more through the wisdom approaches. And for example, now we have a look at the true training that leads there. Just to give you an example, because people usually ignore all of that. They ignore a vast number of suttas and only really look at the stock phrases and tell people to immediately start practicing their jhana on the meditation cushion, even though they have no idea what they are aiming for. And as they have no idea what they are aiming for, they will surely not end up at the right goal. As an example, if you do not have the goal in mind to become a great strength athlete, and someone just describes you certain kinds of practices, you cannot even make sure that you are moving in the right direction, because you have no clue what you are aiming for. So if you just blindly follow certain kinds of instructions, you will not end up at the right place. Why? Because you do not even know what your goal is. You do not even know what the practice is that should lead to a certain goal. How could you ever end up at a goal and realize that you are there? That's impossible. It does not work. And in Majjhima Nikaya 39, it is just one example out of many suttas. It goes as follows. Monks, what makes one a contemplative and a holy person? Monks, you should train in this way. We have conscience and consideration. And this is a very first step that you should undertake. And then, second, our physical conduct will be completely pure, open, unveiled, faultless, and restrained. And the next step is our verbal conduct. I'm obviously shortening parts of the sutta because I don't want to read it all. Even if it's just the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, they are still pretty long if you do not abbreviate certain parts or do not bridge certain parts. And the third part is our verbal conduct will be completely pure, open, unveiled, faultless, and restrained. Then our mental conduct will be completely pure, open, unveiled, faultless, and restrained. This is the training. You are not yet completely faultless, etc. But you try your best. And then our livelihood, our entire working life, so to speak. It's not for the monks, it's obviously not working, but the teaching and everything they do the rest of the time, so to speak, that is your livelihood. And your livelihood will be completely pure, open, unveiled, faultless, and restrained. And only then we will guard our sense faculties. When there's nothing really triggering at the moment, we are still on the guard and make sure that nothing triggering will come our way, because we know it will carry the mind away in the wrong direction. So we guard the doors of the senses. And after that, we will know the right amount when eating. We do not overeat. We have to eat, which is something that is very difficult, having to do something that is also craving-inducing. And even after that, we will be dedicated towards wakefulness. We will also not overindulge in sleep, as an example. We will be mindful and completely aware. Only once all the other training steps are taken to a sufficient degree of maturity, then we will be mindful and completely aware. And then, as a next step, monks. A monk lives then in a secluded dwelling place, a forest, the base of a tree, a mountain, a valley, a cave, a cemetery, a grove, in the open air, or on a heap of straw. And then he abandons covetousness, aversion, dullness, restlessness, doubt. And then, when the 5 hindrances are given up, based on all of the prior steps, so to speak, then, having given up these 5 hindrances, corruptions of the heart and weakness of wisdom, then quite secluded, then, after you have given up sensuality, basically, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, which you are right now, secluded from unskillful qualities, which you have abandoned beforehand, as you have essentially done in the entire training before, you enter and remain in the first jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, which has the rapture and bliss of noticing that you are no longer shackled by anything in the world of the senses. You are free from the entirety of the world of the senses, which is the domain of danger, of the vast, most immediate kinds of danger. Bliss born of seclusion, while thinking and pondering is still there. Then they drench, steep, fill, and spread their body with rapture, bliss, and rapture and bliss born of seclusion. There's no part of the body that is not pervaded with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. It's like when a daft bathroom attendant or their apprentice pours bath powder into a bronze dish, sprinkle it little by little with water. They knead it until the ball of bath powder is soaked and saturated with moisture, spread through inside and out, yet no moisture oozes out. So you make it really complete, your withdrawal from sensuality, and you really spread it to every part of your body. And basically, the entire training happens before jhana. Everything else, as mentioned in Majjhima Nikaya number 117, happens before you reach this milestone of truly living apart from sensuality. And the majority of suttas are like that. Never, ever is any meditation technique of the newer kind mentioned. They are newer editions of the commentarial texts. If you just have a look at the source texts and nothing else, I do not think that any sane person would ever come up with any kind of meditation technique on their own, when they just have access to the lectures that the Buddha likely gave. As I understand it, it is 100% impossible. And jhana is not a classical momentary state or anything like that you attain on the cushion. The description here indicates, or the descriptions in many of the suttas indicate, that your entire human existence is transformed away from the senses. It's transformed away from sensual craving. And it is the same is true for the Brahmaviharas and all other types of concentration. What they have in common is that you truly withdraw from all the sensual kinds of craving, whatever vehicle you use for that. But they are all based on giving up lust, and they are all based on giving up aversion. You cannot do without that. But anyway, I think that is enough for today. Let us now come to the most important points. First, jhana and Brahmavihara are the two main types of concentration, as you mainly have to work with lust or aversion. Those are the gross types of craving that are directed at the world of the senses. And right concentration is a quasi-permanent level up, a milestone in non-valuing the senses any longer, because you have seen them and understood them as dangerous. You have seen the gratification, danger, and escape from sensuality. And lust and hate can be used, both be used, to cultivate non-craving, because craving comes as a bundle. It's a package. You cannot really separate those two. If you are averse to something, you are lustful for the opposite state, so to speak. And these types of samadhi blend seamlessly into the rest of the teaching and clearly lead to a complete liberation regardless of the external conditions. If you truly practice jhana like this, on a mental level, giving up the entirety of the senses, then the only result of that kind of training can be that you completely abandon the world of the senses. And once you have done that, nothing in the world of the senses can touch you any longer. This should be completely clear. Even if you do think that jhana is a completely different state, you should at least acknowledge that this kind of training will lead to a complete withdrawal from the domain of the senses. Even if you think that jhana is something that is more pleasure-based, you must acknowledge that this kind of training here is extraordinarily beneficial. But anyway, that should be enough. If you enjoy what we do here, feel free to like, subscribe, and do the YouTube things and everything like that. And if you want to practice along like-minded individuals, feel free to join the Dhamma Hub Discord server. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.